Is there anything more annoying than being asked, "How are you single?" Like, truly. Because it's never asked in a neutral way. It's always said with like this slight head tilt, like you're their sad little puppy no one's picked up yet. Like you're a clearance item that somehow accidentally made it back onto the shelf. And every time it happens, you kind of freeze for a second because what do you even say? Right? Do you give the honest answer? Do you give the funny answer? Do you just laugh and say, good question, while internally spiraling through your entire dating history like a PowerPoint presentation nobody asked to see? I know what you're thinking. People usually mean it as a compliment. And I know that you're right. But sometimes it lands as interrogation. Am I wrong? Because underneath it, there's this unspoken belief that if you're single long enough, there must be a reason. Like something must be wrong, something must be missing. There must be something you're doing incorrectly. When in reality, being single is less often about what's wrong with you and more about what you're willing to tolerate anymore. But that's not the answer people expect now, is it? They expect a story or a confession, something that makes your singleness make sense to them. And meanwhile, you're just out here living your life, going to work, healing from the things that broke you open, growing into your true self, learning your patterns and other people's, and raising your standards. And somehow that still gets transferred as, but why haven't you been picked yet? Which is honestly hilarious, in my opinion, because the older you get, the more you realize being single isn't a mystery. It's usually a decision. It might be a quiet one, but it's not a complicated one. It's sometimes lonely, true, but honestly, it's very intentional. So, welcome back to Chasing Stability, where today we're talking all about one of the most frequently asked questions. Slightly awkward, oddly loaded question every single person hears all the damn time. How are you single? Or why are you single? We're not talking about it in a defensive way and definitely not in a sad way, but in the very real, sometimes almost funny, sometimes frustrating way it actually exists. Because this episode isn't about convincing anyone you shouldn't be single, it's about unpacking the assumptions around it. Why the question even exists in the first place, why is it appropriate to ask, why it strikes a nerve, and what being single actually looks like when you're someone who isn't settling just to avoid being single. And if you've ever left this question off while secretly wondering why it bothers you so much, or if you've ever felt like you had to explain your life choices just because you don't have a partner standing next to you, this conversation, it's probably going to feel super familiar to you. So let's just get into it, shall we? If I had to pick, I think what makes this question so annoying isn't even the words themselves, it's what they quietly imply, Because nobody asks someone in a relationship, how are you all still together? Nobody looks at the couples fighting literally in public and goes, wow, explain this to me. But single people, we get analyzed like a case study. And it creates this weird pressure where you feel like your life is open for commentary just because you don't have a plus one. Like your happiness needs context, your choices need justification, your timeline needs defending. And sometimes you laugh it off, you make the joke, you say something light, you play along. But other times it just flat out sucks because it taps into something that most single people have already wrestled with internally. And that's that quiet thought that says, is something wrong with me? Am I being too picky? Did I miss my window? Is everyone else figuring something out that I'm not? And that's the part nobody sees when they ask these type of questions casually. They don't see the nights that you question yourself, right? The relationships you stayed in way too long trying to make it work, the ones that you left because it wasn't working enough, even though you loved them so much, the healing you've done and continue to do, the boundaries you've learned to hold up on your own, the growth that doesn't show up on a relationship status. They just see the outcome, single. But being single is rarely the whole entire story. Sometimes it's the result of choosing peace over chaos. Sometimes it's the result of healing patterns you refused to repeat. Sometimes it's the result of knowing what love feels like when it's wrong and deciding you'd rather wait than recreate it again. And when you look at it like that, how are you single starts to sound less like a mystery and more like evidence that you didn't settle. But that doesn't mean the question stops feeling uncomfortable. Because even when you're confident in your choices, there's still a part of you that lives inside of a world that glorifies being chosen. So every time someone asks, "Why are you single?" you're not just answering them, you're having to face this whole old narrative too. And somewhere along the way, you start realizing something that changes everything. Okay. That being single was never really the problem. Tolerating less than you deserved was. Because if we're being honest, right, a lot of relationships don't exist because two people are so deeply in love and aligned. They exist because of timing or proximity, fear of starting over, loneliness, comfort, or the simple fact that someone was there. And that's not shade, it's just reality. Like, how many couples do you know that are together right now because breaking up felt harder than staying together? How many relationships have you witnessed that are built on potential instead of actual presence? How many people do you know that are technically partnered but emotionally alone? And yet we don't interrogate that, do we? But we interrogate the hell out of singleness. It's so odd. I think there's a shift that happens when you stop seeing being single as something you need to escape and start seeing it as something that you chose when you stopped accepting what didn't feel right. Because choosing yourself quietly disqualifies a lot of people. And I mean a lot of people, not in like this super dramatic way or anything, right? Not in a judgmental way or a you're too good for them kind of way, just in a this doesn't really add up to the life that I'm building now kind of way. You stop entertaining connections that feel confusing. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop negotiating your peace just to say you're not alone. And suddenly your dating pool looks significantly smaller. But it's not really smaller, is it? It's just more clear. Because being available doesn't mean you're open to anything. It just means you're open to something real. And once you know the difference, going back becomes practically impossible. Or maybe that's just me. I also think society plays a very specific role in the story of being single. In our world, single gets framed as lonely or as sad or as missing out, as something you do when you can't find anything else. But settling has become normalized. Settling gets praised as commitment, as compromise, as relationships take work, as maturity. And sometimes, yes, relationships do take work, but there's a huge difference between working on something healthy and working to convince yourself that something unhealthy is good enough. The cost of settling isn't loud. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks like quiet anxiety, like emotional exhaustion, like pretending you're fulfilled, like shrinking parts of yourself to maintain harmony, like constantly explaining why you stay. It looks like betraying your own intuition in slow motion. But honestly, choosing not to settle comes with its own grief too. There's a loneliness in walking away from that whole idea. Sure, there's uncertainty in waiting. There are nights where you wonder if you made it harder on yourself than it really truly needed to be. That grief is real, but so is the peace that came with walking away. The peace is not questioning your worth daily, the peace of not begging for clarity, the peace of knowing you didn't abandon yourself to avoid being alone. Because when you zoom it all out, waiting isn't empty time, it's protected time. Time where you keep your standards intact or where you developed them, time where you built a life that doesn't collapse without a partner, time where love becomes something that adds to you, not something that defines you. It's not passive, it's extremely powerful. Okay, but so then the next question that comes along is, why does it feel like there are fewer people in the world to date, right? Most of the things you hear coming out of single people's mouths is dating is hard now. There's nobody out there. I can't connect. The pool is trash, which is sometimes fair. But a lot of the time, what we're actually experiencing isn't a lack of people, it's a lack of compatibility. Because when you grow, the tolerance shifts. The things you used to overlook feel much louder. The confusion you once normalized feels extremely exhausting. The mixed signals that you tried to decode start to feel really unnecessary. And suddenly, interactions that used to turn into relationships now just end so much earlier, not because you're closed off, but because you are so much more clear on what you want. You ask better questions. You notice inconsistencies way faster. You trust your gut sooner. You don't romanticize potential the way that you once did. So the pool didn't shrink. What's really happening is your filter is sharpening. And honestly, that can feel lonely at times too. I get that to my core. Growth is weird like that, though. You outgrow dynamics before you meet the people who match the version of you now. So there's this in between space where you're no longer available for what you used to accept, but you haven't yet met what aligns. And from the inside, that can feel like scarcity, but it's not scarcity, it's transition. It's life reorganizing around your standards. It's your nervous system really refusing chaos it once tolerated. It's your self worth quietly changing the type of love you're willing to participate in. The dating pool doesn't get smaller because you're too much. It gets smaller because you stopped being less. You stopped shapeshifting. You stopped overextending. You stopped performing compatibility where there wasn't any in the first place. You stopped making excuses for people that didn't actually fit. And that doesn't mean the right people disappeared. It just means the wrong ones have stopped having a shot. And maybe that's why the question lingers the way it does. Because when your standards change and your filters sharpen, it doesn't just affect who you date, it changes how people also see you. The version of you that used to tolerate confusion, that version made more sense to most people. The version of you that stayed, that felt predictable. But this version, the one who walks away faster, the one who doesn't entertain potential, the one who's calm about being alone, that version confuses the hell out of people. And when people don't understand something, they question it. So instead of asking themselves why so many relationships are built on negative compromise, they ask why you're not in one. And that's where the shift has to happen. Because maybe then it isn't figuring out how to answer the question that they're asking, but changing the way that we just hear it. So instead of hearing, how are you single? Like it's a confusion or a concern, what if it's actually a reflection? What if it quietly means, how are you so grounded? How are you so comfortable in your own company? How did you learn to build a life that doesn't revolve around being chosen? Because singleness isn't always just absence. Sometimes it's about alignment, alignment with your peace, alignment with your healing, alignment with the life you're building that love will one day join, not interrupt. And being alone doesn't mean you're behind. It doesn't mean you missed your chance. It doesn't mean everyone else figured out something that you didn't. It just means your timeline looks different. And different doesn't mean wrong. Write that one down, put it on your mirror in your bathroom, do whatever you need to do. My sticky note's been there for years. So if you're like me and this question has been following you around for years and it's made you second guess yourself, I want you to hold on to a few things I'm about to say, okay? You're not late. You're just living a life until you find someone who fits. You're not too much. You're just very crystal clear on what you need. And if those few non negotiables aren't met, it's a no. You're not asking for impossible things. You're asking for consistency, safety, effort, and mutual choosing, which are actually very reasonable requests. And you're not single because you failed. You're single because you stopped participating in half love. You stopped convincing yourself confusion was a possibility. You stopped calling bare minimum potential. You stopped abandoning yourself just to keep someone else. And that's not something to explain away. That's something to be proud of because it just means you respect and love yourself. And let's just be honest, the right people don't question why you're single. They understand it. They've probably lived it before you. They recognize the growth. They respect the boundaries that you've built. They see the discernment on why you've changed what you're looking for. They notice the strength it takes to walk away instead of settle. They don't ask you to justify your timeline. They don't need a backstory to believe your worth. They don't treat your singleness like it's this huge mystery for them to solve. They see it for what it is, evidence that you didn't compromise who you are just to be loved. And when someone meets you in that kind of understanding, it becomes so obvious that this season isn't a waiting room. It's a building season, a refining season, a choosing yourself over and over and over again season. Not rushed, not measured, not compared, just calm. And that's how you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And with that, that's where I'm going to leave you today. If this episode felt a little too familiar, just know you're not the only one sitting there rolling your eyes when you get asked this question. If you have a friend who is tired of explaining why they're single, send this podcast to them. Not as reassurance that they'll find somebody soon, but as a reminder that nothing about where they are right now needs fixing. And if this episode made you laugh and nod and feel a little bit more understood or seen, please share it, post it, text about it, talk about it, do whatever you want to do. Because the more we normalize choosing ourselves, the less this question feels like something we need to defend. If you're not already, please make sure you are following Chasing Stability wherever you are listening to this podcast so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got a lot more real conversations ahead. So stay soft, stay selective, and remember that peace is never the wrong choice. This is Chasing Stability, and I will meet you in the in between next Tuesday.